India and Vietnam will celebrate the 45th anniversary of diplomatic ties next year. For the past few decades, the two countries' economic relations have gone from strength to strength, with two-way trade turnover hitting $5.13 billion last year. This figure is expected to be raised to $15 billion in 2020. This target is considered achievable thanks to the both sides' efforts, especially the current visit to Vietnam by India Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In today's Crosstalk, we'll review Vietnam and India's trade and investment ties and discuss the prospects of economic cooperation for the two countries. Thank you, Ambassador Harrish and Mr. Indronil Sengupta for joining us. But before we start our discussion, we will take a look at a clip to review Vietnam and India economic trade relations.
Vietnam and India established diplomatic relations in 1972. Since then, India's relations with Vietnam have been marked by growing economic and commercial engagement. India is among the top 10 trading partners of Vietnam, while Vietnam is ranked as the 25th trading partner of India. According to Vietnam's official data, total trade volume in recent years touched over $5 billion in 2014, a five-fold increase compared to that in the period of 2007-2009.
India, they export, raw materials for the, manufacturing sector in Vietnam in different segments, pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical products, chemicals, plastic products, leather, textile, spare parts. These are the segments, where the India is exporting to Vietnam.
Ấn Độ là thị trường rất là lớn và tôi nghĩ là cũng rất đa dạng. 1,2 tỷ 50 dân thì không phải là nhỏ. Bây giờ cái người mà trung lưu của Ấn Độ là tăng lên, họ đòi hỏi phải được tiêu dùng những mặt hàng đa dạng chứ không phải chỉ riêng mặt hàng trong nước. Đấy. Thế cho nên là tôi nghĩ rằng là chúng ta hoàn toàn có thể là tăng cường cái thương mại xuất khẩu sang Ấn Độ.
During a reception with the newly accredited Indian ambassador to Vietnam, Harrish on July the 23rd, Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc called for broader India-Vietnam cooperation to boost bilateral trade to $15 billion in 2020.
Vietnam and India joined the ASEAN-India Trade in Goods, or TIG, agreement, which took effect in 2009. Ambassador Harrish, could you provide some assessment about Vietnam-India trade relations since then?
Recognition of Vietnam as a market economy in 2009 and the signing and entry into force of the India-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement in goods have been a great impetus for the bilateral trade. If you see in the last 6 to 7 years, the bilateral trade between our two countries has gone up by over 400%, from around $2 billion in 2009 to roughly around $8 billion today. So I think there has been a huge growth in trade. Likewise, there has been a strong interest in mutual investments. I think both Vietnam and India have grown at a tremendous rate in the last few years. It has been very strong, and the future looks very bright.
Ambassador, which are the top products that are traded between Vietnam and India?
I think as far as Indian exports to Vietnam are concerned, machinery, pharmaceuticals, seafood, and garments, textiles and cotton are major items of our exports. There are a lot of service exports too in the field of information technology, in the field of software. As far as Vietnam's exports to India are concerned, mobile phones and accessories, computer peripherals and computer parts, and metal and ores are important components of Vietnam's exports to India.
Mr. Indronil Sengupta, as a prominent company operating in Vietnam, how does your company get involved in the trade activities between Vietnam and India?
Primarily we have chosen Vietnam for investment, but at the same time, because of the trade opportunities, we have started in a very humble way, but we are expanding. Our main trade export between India and Vietnam is watches for Tatas, the Titan watches, which is doing pretty well. We have sold around 150,000 watches last year.
Then we are doing steel, but we are doing both export as well as import to Vietnam, and some agrochemicals like pesticides. But in future, in fact, the next 1 year, what we are going to do and what you will see, which will be a significant increase over the previous years, we'll do more of the solar panels, and we will start our automobiles from India, both assembled as well as kits, which will be assembled here and sold in Vietnamese market. In fact, you'll be happy to know next Friday, which is 9th September, we are going to launch the vehicles made from India.
Vietnam and India set bilateral trade turnover of $15 billion by 2020. So how do you think the two countries can do?
It's a challenging task, but one which both countries are determined to achieve. I think the focus is on expanding our current areas of economic engagement and trade and looking for new areas. We believe there are a lot of synergies in our textile sector, a lot of synergies in our leather and leather export sector for both countries. I think India is in a good position to be able to meet the requirements for fabric, for cotton, and for leather for Vietnamese exports. We also think there is great potential in agro-commodities. We look at the renewable energy sector, for example, where our Prime Minister's commitment to have 175 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2022 means almost 100 gigawatts of solar and 60 gigawatts of wind energy. This gives Indian companies an advantage and scale because of the magnitude of the rollout of wind and solar energy in India. So I think this is going to be another focus area for our economic engagement, and that is where companies like Tata, who are already present here, and many other Indian companies too. We think there is great potential even in oil and gas. We have Indian companies that have been in Vietnam, such as the ONGC Videsh Limited, which has been here for almost 28 years.
Yeah, there are a few areas which I think can be expanded much more. One is the marine products, electrical goods. So some of the companies like Leoa and all are very competitive globally and good quality. So I know some of these companies are looking very seriously into India to export from Vietnam. The electrical goods into India. And India is a huge market, you know, and especially our power accessories. I mean, all the transformers, wires and all, it's growing like crazy.
And to add to that, I think if Vietnamese companies have a base in India to manufacture, if they produce these goods in India, I think their ability to cater to the requirements of the Indian market is that much better.
This is a 100% Indian invested tea processor. In 2009, when it first started operation, the company's export value reached $5.5 million. However, this figure increased to $18 million after 6 years, making it a prominent success story of Indian investment in Vietnam.
We have a lot of people meeting, business people meeting, and I find everyone is very happy with the attitude of the people here. They are happy with the way they are working hard, the government. There are no hindrance from various departments. Everyone is trying to help the investors to have a good sailing in Vietnam.
Em làm việc đến hiện giờ là năm thứ 3, thu nhập thì bình quân hàng tháng là 5 triệu một tháng. Mức thu nhập này thì ổn định so với để lo cho cuộc sống của bản thân, gia đình.
According to Indian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, there are currently 132 Indian invested projects with a total registered capital of about $1 billion, including through third countries. Indian companies are investing in mineral exploration and processing, IT, agricultural processing, and sugar.
You see, Vietnam-India potential, I can tell you that it is not even started. There is a amount of presence of India in Vietnam, but the potential is tremendous. So slowly things are getting better, and now investment is increasing.
Vietnam is one of the destination which Indian companies should seriously look, because this connect us to the ASEAN region, and this is a big market for Indian companies. If you set up the base here, definitely there is an advantage because ASEAN, they have the free trade agreement.
Ambassador, the number of Indian businesses entering Vietnam has increased over years. So how do you think about this trend, and could you give us a deeper analysis?
If you look at it, Vietnam has emerged as an important investment destination for FDI globally. I think the fact that Vietnam is a part of important free trade agreements in the area, not just within ASEAN, but also as part of the TPP and the Vietnam-European Union Free Trade Agreement, makes it an ideal destination for investments because a business that has a presence in Vietnam is able to leverage these free trade agreements and export to these markets, to these huge markets. And for India, I think a lot of Indian companies look at the Vietnamese market not just from this perspective, but also the fact that they're already there in sectors where they feel they can really bring scale and value when they enter Vietnam. Sectors such as textile, automobiles, or even renewable energy.
And Mr. Sengupta, as a prominent Indian company operating in Vietnam, why do you think the Vietnamese market is so attractive?
I think first of all, the consumption, consumption in Vietnam per capita is quite attractive, and it's very upwardly mobile consumption behavior. Secondly, the demographics. The demographics has two impact. One is on the consumption itself, the consumer behavior itself, and secondly, the skill set availability. When we are putting up an investment, we do not want to, we want the local population to run the business or to run the factory. And that is only possible when you have a skill set available. And because of the demographics of Vietnam, where the young workforce is very young, they're very eager to learn, and hence it is very, very easy for us to set up something. For example, our steel plant in China has only one expat. Rest out of 209 people, only one expat. 208 are local Vietnamese employees. That's another thing. And secondly, thirdly, there are, most of the policies of the government of Vietnam are quite investor friendly and very progressive looking. Those are very convenient for SME sectors. You just can like a plug and play. You just bring in your whole setup and you just start from day one.
What are the biggest obstacles that Indian businesses have encountered so far in Vietnam?
I think it's not only for Indian investors. I think for all foreign investors, whenever they go to a new country, there are certain challenges for sure. I mean, it's not only in Vietnam. The challenges in Vietnam are typical of any developing country. It may be Vietnam, it may be India or somewhere else. Now, we had a long journey. We could not succeed in one project before.
How have you dealt with this?
Still, we kept the perseverance to embark on the second project, which is also quite big, and that has been going well so far. And we want to see it as a successful completion, and that will, as Mr. Harrish explained, it will motivate or encourage other Indian investors to come in. But the key to, there will be challenges for sure, but that doesn't mean we give up. And the belief that as starters we had this belief that Vietnam is a place to invest. There are fundamentally certain good things and right things about Vietnam. And okay, we had failures, but we also had successes.
Mm-hmm. How do you assess the investment environment in Vietnam?
I think as Indronil just said, the government has really made the business environment very attractive. For Indian businesses, from our perspective, I think the success of an Indian company to be able to bring a project, an investment project to conclusion has a telling impact on the behavior of other Indian businesses and industries. So for example, like in the case of the Tatas, they have had one project which did not come to a conclusion, and we look forward now to the successful conclusion of their current investment project, which is that of Tata Power in Long Phu, a 1320 megawatt thermal power plant. So I think the success of one project, of a large investment project such as theirs, will give greater confidence to other investors that Vietnam indeed would be a very good investment choice for them.
What are your recommendations for the Vietnamese government to improve the legal framework to protect the rights of investors, Indian investors in Vietnam?
I think from our side, we are seeking facilitation from the government of Vietnam so that large investments can reach conclusion, and this is important so that it has a demonstration effect on other businesses and investors. I think it's important that we take a few key investment projects, bring them to conclusion and be able to demonstrate that here it has reached a successful outcome. That will give confidence to a lot of other investors.
What do you think?
I completely sort of echo Ambassador's, we're not asking for something special. One of the things which may be required is a little bit of speed, speed in decision making. That may be, and this is only for the big investors. I think for SME, it's pretty much okay, and things gets implemented quickly. But in a bigger investment where there's a lot of interface with many agencies, the speed can be increased. That's something, speed of decision making. That's something probably would help not only Indian investors but all the foreign investors, who are interested or looks Vietnam in a very positive way.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi made an official visit to Vietnam on September the 3rd at the invitation of Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc. This is the first visit of Indian Prime Minister to Vietnam after 15 years. This is an important visit when the two countries are heading to the 45th anniversary of the establishment of our diplomatic ties and 10 years of strategic partnership. At the meeting, Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc and his Indian counterpart Narendra Modi have shared the solutions which aim at further strengthening strategic ties, including trade and investment.
Vietnam has been the heart of India's Look East policy. So how is it confirmed during the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Vietnam?
I think India's Look East and Act East policies have been premised on the fact that ASEAN is not only close to us in terms of geography, history, we also occupy the same economic and strategic space in our neighborhoods. Based on this, our Prime Minister has said that we would like the northeast region of India to be the gateway for ASEAN. The focus of our Prime Minister has been on building connectivity between India and the ASEAN. In fact, our Prime Minister has announced a $1 billion line of credit to enhance physical and digital connectivities between India and the ASEAN. Right now, we are in a good position because Vietnam is also the coordinating country for the India-ASEAN relationship for the period 2015 to 2018. And in this period, we will be executing many projects under the ASEAN umbrella, including in Vietnam. So Vietnam is a very important pillar of India's Act East policy, and this will get further emphasized after the visit of our Prime Minister.
We have been sort of really focusing on ASEAN for now almost for more than 10 years, and we have done, for example, Tatas, we have done, as you know, in Singapore, in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, we have done. Vietnam, we made a beginning, and we hope to sort of have a space in ASEAN more significant than the other ASEAN countries.
After the visit by Indian Prime Minister, how do you expect Indian businesses to be supported further to operate in Vietnam?
This visit is a very significant visit. This is a visit bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister after 15 years. So with such strong commitment from the government of India, I'm sure there will be a reciprocal commitment from government of Vietnam, and after the visit, I believe there will be much more interest from Indian companies to do more business with Vietnam, and vice versa, Vietnamese companies to do more with business in India.
Ambassador, how are trade and investment relations emphasized during this visit?
I think both countries have taken a strategic decision during the visit of Prime Minister Zung to India in 2014. So I think since then we have identified important sectors for increasing our trade. Our businesses are geared up to look at investments in each other countries. And I think after the visit, you will see a further impetus from governments in facilitating businesses and investments. I think you could even see, governments extending concessional credit where required to encourage investments or businesses. You will also see both governments encouraging a greater interaction. We just had a visit of our defense minister in June, and there was a large delegation of Indian companies from the defense business sector. And we are looking forward to a significant CEO delegation from the Confederation of Indian Industry, which will visit Vietnam in November, is to give a clear signal to businesses and the industry that economic engagement is a key focus area for the leaderships of both of our countries.
Thank you, Ambassador Harrish and Mr. Indronil Sengupta for joining us.
Thank you, Madam.
The ASEAN-India Agreement for Trade in Goods was one of the momentum that boosted trade and investment between Vietnam and India. Vietnam is poised to play a greater role in facilitating India's Look East policy, both as a strategic partner and as the ASEAN country coordinator for relations with India in 2015. Meanwhile, India offers a potential consumption market for Vietnamese goods. Two-way trade and investment, therefore, are expected to take off in the near future. And that also wraps up this episode of Bizline. Thank you very much for watching. You can always rewatch our program at vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. From our team here in Hanoi, until next time.